Hello everybody, well welcome back to my channel. If you joined me before, I'm Louise Savage of Louise Savage Muses, and welcome if you're new to my YouTube channel in which I muse about books. So today I want to talk about inheritance books. Now I've blatantly and shamelessly taken this idea from one of my favourite radio moments of the week. I'm a massive radio fan. And on a Saturday morning, my husband and I love to listen to Saturday Live on BBC Radio 4 and with the lovely Reverend Richard Coles. And each week there is a segment which is called Inheritance Tracks, in which a well-known person will talk about the song that they feel they've inherited from their past, from their family, and then the song that they would pass on as their inheritance track to somebody else. Well, I've cheated a bit because I realised that actually there's videos and videos worth of this stuff, because it was an absolute delight to sort of go back and ponder the books that had really I felt had been passed down, particularly in this instance from my mum. I'm absolutely sure that my voracious reading is down to her. She was an avid reader herself, and bitterly regretted the fact that she had to leave school at 16 and hadn't been able to go on and study any further than that. So she was kind of self-educated, I suppose, in many ways. But anyway, she passed on her love of reading, and so in some ways this video is a tribute to her, really, and my gratitude for being exposed to lots of wonderful books as a child. Now, I was born in 1965, so obviously, my sort of formative reading was done in the mid to late 70s, early 80s, I suppose, and it was a different world then. So certainly this first set of books that I'm going to discuss are, generally speaking, very white, not necessarily male, there's a mixture, but I think we have to sort of, I just think it's really important to be aware of the context. I was growing up in a rural village in Derbyshire, but these books did expand my horizons, very much so. And the first one actually is a very well-known American novel. Now, I remember it initially, and this is where I just loved preparing for this. This is my very first copy of Little Women, and you can see it's really dated. It's been adapted for children, and it's it's very worn. I mean, part of me feels ashamed of this, and part of me just thinks it's wonderful, because this book has been so read. It was secondhand when it came to me. So you've got these lovely illustrations of the Little Women, the four sisters around the fire in their home. And this book had a massive impact on me growing up. I came from a family that I was the first of the family to go to university. And I think the character of Jo in Little Women, so it focuses on, I should imagine a lot of you have read it, but if you haven't read it, it's set in America during the American Civil War. And it focuses on a mother and four daughters who are growing up in poverty, but in a very sort of genteel way, because the father has lost all his money and gone off to fight in the war. Oh, I say fight, I think he's a chaplain. So, they are growing up in sort of very straitened circumstances. And it's got a very sort of strong Christian backbone to it, this novel. The girls are always doing good deeds, but it's the morality of the novel, I think, is one of its strengths. There is a sort of emphasis on looking out for the poor and not being selfish and all those sorts of really positive Christian values, and values that are pertinent to other religions, obviously, too. So I think it was important for that reason, but I think for me the most important thing was the character of Jo. She's very precocious. I suppose, she might have been labelled a tomboy in the past. She liked climbing trees. She liked going up to the garret. I always wanted a garret when I read this book, where, you know, she takes russet apples, which are still my favourite apples, and she goes up to the garret and eats her apples while she reads and writes, and she wants to be a writer. And she and her sisters put on plays, and there's this fantastic sort of relationship between her and the boy next door, Laurie, who clearly, they have a really strong friendship, clearly very much in love with her. But the wonderful thing about this novel is that it doesn't follow the conventional romantic route. And I won't spoil it in case you don't read it, but I think that's one of the things also that I loved about it. And Jo is fierce, trying to be, you know, in the 1800s, in a world where women, you know, it's hard for women to be independent. She is desperately trying to be independent, and she wants to sell her stories and make some money. So yeah, I think this book had a profound effect. I'm not sure when I first started reading it. I mean, I suspect this version I probably had, sorry, I'm not holding that very well. I probably had when I was about 8 or 9 maybe. I'm not sure. And then this is the version that I remember reading when I was older. And again, you can see, look, it's a really old hardback book. It's lost its spine. I probably read this 2 or 3 times as a young kid, probably about age 11, maybe, something like that. There's no date inside, so I can't really tell, but my handwriting looks very, very immature there. So I suspect, and you can see it's secondhand. There've been other owners of this book. So yeah, that's very much loved and cherished, and was passed on to me by my mum. Book number 2 is in an even worse state. So I was horrified when I took this off the shelf. I don't know. I don't think I did this to it. I suspect it might have been one of my children. But this was my mum's favourite book when she was a young woman. And I think there are lots of novels that she passed on to me that definitely sparked my interest in history. So this is a book called Desiree, and it's written by a woman called Annemarie Selinko, who was actually born in Austria and spoke German. That was her native language. But during the Second World War, she had to leave Austria with her Danish husband and settled in Scandinavia. And this novel tells the story of Desiree Clary, who was the fiancée of Napoleon Bonaparte. So they were due to marry. Then obviously his kind of career, she was a merchant's daughter, so she came from sort of, you know, relatively humble beginnings when you find out where life actually takes her. So she's engaged to Napoleon, so there's lots of wonderful history in this, you know. So I learnt about him, I learnt about his campaigns, I learnt about all sorts of things, but told with this fantastic, very twisted love story, because of course he eventually goes off to Paris and meets Josephine. And the story is rooted in truth, you know. She was a real person, she did exist, and ultimately she became the Queen of Sweden and Norway. Desiree did. So I adored this as a child, and again it was a book that I went back to. I didn't just read it once, I read it several times, and it had a profound influence on me. I haven't read it as an adult, and I think at some point maybe I'll listen to it on Audible, but I would like to revisit it. So that's Desiree by Annemarie Selinko. I'd love to know if anybody out there has read this book. I think it is still in print, but I'm not totally sure. Now, third on the list is The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy. And I was given to this as a Christmas present, and it was 1977, because it says so inside here. It says, "To Louise, with lots of love from Mummy and Daddy, Christmas 1977. And this was the first Thomas Hardy novel that I owned that was actually my own. And the same Christmas, my brother had a guinea pig for Christmas. And you know what it's like when you get a brand new book and how lovely it is and how nice it smells. And this guinea pig, I don't know if you can see, actually nibbled my book on Christmas Day. Wasn't very happy about that at the time, but of course now it's a really lovely memory of that Christmas, and I can remember how it felt to be given this as a present. I had read Far from the Madding Crowd, I think, by then. And was fast becoming a Thomas Hardy fan. I absolutely love his storytelling. you know, the sort of the tragedy, the female, strong female characters, or not always strong actually, but certainly in many of his novels, and just that evocation of sort of Victorian life as well. Now, The Mayor of Casterbridge, I think, is a stunning novel, and I do go back to it. And the premise of the novel is that Michael Henchard, he's fallen on hard times, and he sells his wife at a fair. And that scene where he sells his wife is just, I mean, it's worth reading just for those few pages. And then, you know, eventually he becomes Mayor of Casterbridge, and their lives pick up again. So his wife Susan and he re-meet, and that sets off a whole other chain of events. I love I can't remember his name, the character of the seaman, the old sea dog who buys Susan Henchard. I just can't remember what he's called, but he's a lovely character. And of course there's a daughter involved as well. So it's a wonderful twisty-turny plot. The descriptions of the sort of Dorset countryside are stunning in this novel, and it's a page turner. I think all Hardy's novels have me on the edge of my seat. There we go. And then another sort of slightly quirky novel, which my mum, again, I think initially I borrowed this from the library and then wanted my own copy, so I bought this second hand somewhere, probably the wonderful Scarthin Books near Matlock. And this is a novel by W H Ainsworth, or Harrison Ainsworth, called Old St Paul's. Now, the plot of this I couldn't even begin to tell you. It's twisty, it's turny, it's very gothic. There are some real villains in here, and also some very lovely characters too. And Old St Paul's is you know, it sort of what's the word? It centres around the original St Paul's Cathedral, and so you get all these fantastic. You know, I really feel like I know what that cathedral looked like. And also I've got memories of it full of plague victims and things like that. So it covers the Great Fire of London and also the Great Plague. So again, it was fascinating historically. It's quite grim in places. You know, you get descriptions of the plague pustules and the mass graves, and you know, it doesn't sort of I suppose it's a sensationalist novel. I think it was written in the 1840s, and I know it was serialised. I think one of the first, I think way before Dickens, I think it was one of the first novels to be serialised in the Times. So yeah, it's fascinating, and I don't know how I'd feel about this if I went back and read it again. I read it several times as a child, loved it, couldn't put it down. Again, I'd love to know if there's anybody out there who has any sort of connection with this novel. But there you are, W H Ainsworth, Old St Paul's. And then the wonderful I Claudius. Now, my mum very cunningly bought me this novel when the TV series of I Claudius came on the screen. So I think I was sort of reading it coincidentally with watching that wonderful series. So I'm trying to think who was in it. Sian Phillips played Augustus's wife. Brian Blessed was a very good Augustus. What's the wonderful actor who played Tiberius? George somebody. But anyway, it's a star-studded cast. And Robert Graves knew his classics. He wrote a wonderful sort of dictionary of mythology. And so I Claudius is a sort of, it purports to be the diary of Claudius, who was an emperor who succeeded Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, all those very sort of sensationalist emperors, if you like, the ones that history has really sort of created as these very fascinating, very flawed individuals, which they may well have been. He draws largely on Tacitus and Suetonius, the Roman historians, I think, as his sources for the material in these books. There's I Claudius, and then there's a second one called Claudius the God. But again, I think this was one of the reasons, one of the things that sort of roped me into my fascination for the ancient world, and particularly the classical world, There's so much intrigue in here, but again, it's living, breathing history as you're reading it. You know, you go on campaign with Caligula, and you know, you do all sorts of, you wander you know, you go into the Senate house in ancient Rome, and you know, you go to Augustus's and Livia's villas, and yeah, it just really fired my imagination. And to me, this is a bit of a page turner too. They're really hard to sort of put down. There you go. And then finally for today, the last novel that I chose to talk about today in terms of inheritance books, I was going to say inheritance tracks, is this one, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. I was really heavily influenced by Steinbeck, I think, as a young person. I loved Of Mice and Men when I read it. The Pearl, I think, is a beautiful story. And there's also a lesser known novel called The Moon is Down, what's another novella, which is a sort of story about a small village community that gets overrun by a Nazi-style army. And that novel is beautiful, and yet I don't really see it these days. But anyway, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck is the most, oh gosh, it's just sensational. It's a classic. He won the Nobel Prize, didn't he, for literature, I think. And it describes a family called the Joad family, who are suffering from, you know, during the Great Depression in America. They come from Oklahoma, and they're known as Okies. And one member of the family, Tom, has just sort of come out of jail. He's on parole, and he makes his way back to the family home, and there's nobody there. It's deserted, and the family have been forced to leave. They've been evicted, as have all the sort of farmers in the local area. And he eventually finds them at his uncle's house, and they're packing up to leave. They're packing up this big old truck to set on this journey across the Dust Bowl and to California in search of work, in search of dignity, in search of some sort of humanity, because the way they've been treated is appalling. So they go on this adventure, and Tom accompanies them, even though he's on parole and he's breaching the terms of that, so it's risky for him. There's also the wonderful character of the preacher, or intriguing character of the preacher, Casey, who also goes with him on that journey. And it's the dignity and the persistence and the bravery of these people who are experiencing, you know, a migration and an economic migration. And Steinbeck, you know, tells it warts and all. It's not glamorized. It's not, you know, you really sort of feel that you are reading the story of these people as it should have been told. And again, I haven't read it for many years. I think it's time I reread it. But there we go. Wonderful novel, The Grapes of Wrath. So 6 books, 6 inheritance books. I think, you know, I may well return to this theme, but it's a little bit self-indulgent, I know that. But I really enjoyed thinking about the books that had been passed on by my mum. And of course there are other books, you know, there are books that were passed on by teachers, by friends, by, you know, I think it's really interesting to think about the way that your reading is steered by the people that you associate with. Anyway, it's a very rainy Saturday morning. Off to Suffolk shortly, and hoping to meet up with Simon of Savage Reads tomorrow. Trains and power cuts and storms permitting. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and really look forward to talking to you again soon. Take care. Bye.